Well, as Russia's Vladimir Putin hosts leaders of BRICS, Russian forces are slowly advancing on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine. Russian troops are closing in on the city of Pokrovsk. That's an important transport hub for Ukraine's military. Our correspondent Max Zander has been speaking to troops defending the city and witnessed the devastation inflicted by Russian artillery.
On the outskirts of Pokrovsk, this group of men has been working their howitzers since the break of dawn.
They say that artillery is the god of war. It causes 90% of the damage that's inflicted on the enemy.
But the Russians have more firepower and more people. Pressure on this part of the front line is intense. Russian infantry groups keep advancing, as seen in this footage captured by a Ukrainian surveillance drone. It's broadcast live to the command post. Back on the ground, we seek shelter as the unit prepares for potential retaliatory fire. It's been a busy morning.
We drove the enemy back. Some were killed, some were hiding. We shot at them. Those who stayed more or less alive ran away. We shot at them too.
Commander Vasil is determined to defend Pokrovsk.
They won't take it. They won't take Pokrovsk. Because if they do, it will be bad. The road will be open and the Russians will have a direct path to Dnipro.
This is the city they're defending. Trains stopped working weeks ago. The lack of power and water, as well as Russian shelling, have driven people out.
Pokrovsk once was home to 60,000 people, and during the war it became an important hub for the military. Soldiers would come here to take a break from the front lines.
Those days are long gone.
That's where the Druzhba Hotel was, and over there was the Corleone Pizzeria. In 2023, enemy rockets hit there for the first time.
The Druzhba Hotel was attacked last year. Volodymyr's commander was among those killed. In a residential neighborhood, we can see the result of a recent Russian attack, purportedly caused by a glide bomb.
We found one man dead in his bed. He had gone to sleep, and his house received a direct hit. The adjacent buildings and structures caught fire. The blaze covered 400 square meters.
Russian attacks on the city center have decreased slightly, because Ukrainians have sent reinforcements to the outskirts of the city. They take most of the fire. We're back at the position. A new batch of shells just arrived. But it's a drop in the ocean. Ukrainian troops say they barely receive enough military aid to hold on to their positions, and certainly not enough to change the course of the war. Negotiating peace with Russia, like some are calling for, cannot be the answer, says the commander.
If Zelensky gives up the territory that was seized, in 2 years we will have to go to war again. The Russians are constantly being re-equipped. They're producing shells every day. What about us? Give us shells, Europe.
As we head back to the city, we make a stop at a brand new trench. It's one of many dug in the area around Pokrovsk, and a potential foreshadowing of battles to come.
A report from Max Zander, who joins us now from Kyiv. Welcome, Max. How confident are those troops that they can hold Pokrovsk, given the lack of artillery shells, for example, and the scattered deliveries by pickup truck?
Well, they try to be optimistic as they can. And from what they've been telling us, they're trying to hold on because they know a lot depends on them. The artillery unit we filmed with knows that the soldiers at the zero line fighting depends on them giving them cover. At the same time, all of the soldiers fighting in the region are trying to keep the Russians away from Pokrovsk. And it seems that at the moment, at least, the situation is somewhat stable, or rather manageable. That could change anytime soon, though. The Russians at the moment are likely to be 7 to 8 kilometers away from the eastern outskirts of Pokrovsk. And the Ukrainians have sent reinforcements. So we have been told 2 to 3 brigades. So likely around 10,000 soldiers to aid in the defense of Pokrovsk. Now, it doesn't appear at the moment that the Russians are trying to go straight for Pokrovsk, but rather focus on the southern flank of the city, try to partially encircle it, and then eventually drive the Ukrainians out or force them to withdraw, like similar strategy that we have seen in other cities in the Donetsk region over the course of the war. And despite these soldiers being very optimistic, we also had the opportunity to speak some soldiers off the record who were less optimistic, stating that they are worried that the city of Pokrovsk could soon become a scenery of urban combat, that there could be bloody door-to-door fighting, similar to what we've seen in other cities in the Donbas area, just as Bakhmut, for example, or Avdiivka.
And talk us through the city's strategic importance, Max. What happens if it falls to Russia?
Right, so the city is quite important. It directly connects this part of the Donbas region with the neighboring Dnipropetrovsk region through a highway, through a train line that is now partially interrupted. But a lot of the Ukrainian reinforcements, a lot of the personnel and weapons would come through that corridor, so to say. So if the Russians were able to take the city, they could disrupt the logistics in the area and force the Ukrainians to change up how they distribute their logistics in that part of the region. Now, should the Russians be able to take the town, that likely would cost them a lot of material, but also a lot of lives. Going on the offensive this part of the year in winter in a very large town would be to the disadvantage of the Russians, and likely this would result in very bloody fighting with likely tens of thousands of casualties if Avdiivka and Bakhmut is something to go by here. Likely the Russians would then also be able to use the higher ground in which Pokrovsk is located, and would be able to use that advantage to strike the neighboring areas better with artillery, with drone strikes. But overall, this would have a serious impact on the morale of the Ukrainian soldiers and the Ukrainian population. It would be a propaganda victory for the Russians.
Let's talk about morale. What's it like? Do you see a difference now from your previous visits to fighting positions or your talks with returning troops?
Right. I mean, you have the soldiers who are still motivated, who still keep on going. But we also see a lot of fatigue nowadays. Some of the soldiers have been in a fight for a very long time. There is no perspective of the fight ending. There is no perspective of demobilization. A lot of the new troops that are now coming are being mobilized, are less motivated, being forced out of civilian life, coming to the front line. We also have a sense that there is among the soldiers that this fight is unfair to them, or the way Ukraine is mobilizing is unfair to them, because you still have around 6 million young men who are not registered as they would have had to do under the new law, and even under the civilian population there is fatigue. It's even in a city like Kiev, for example, you have to deal with drones coming up every night. There is definitely fatigue also under the civilian population.
Okay, thank you, Max. DW correspondent Max Zander in Kyiv.
All right, I want to pull in now Frank Ledwidge. He's a military analyst and senior lecturer in war studies at Portsmouth University. Frank, good to see you again. Let me ask you, how long can the Ukrainian army hold the city of Pokrovsk?
Good afternoon, Brett. Great to be with you again. No one knows. Today, the outpost town of Selidove is essentially under siege, and people expect that to fall certainly within the next few days. The Russians have been creeping towards Pokrovsk now. It's their main effort, I think, for the last 2 or 3 months. I would suggest we'll be looking at major battle either in the late winter or early spring at the latest. And whether the Ukrainians can hold it, of course, depends on the amount of resources they're willing to put in. The commander they have, General Syrski, he was commander at Bakhmut. He acquired a nickname there, General 200, which is the code for killed in action, because of his willingness to sacrifice men for land. So the answer is, who knows? No question at all, though, Pokrovsk will be a major battle for the reasons the commander there in the report outlined.
Mm-hmm. What would it mean if Pokrovsk were to fall?
Well, again, the commander gave us an introduction to that. It would represent a breach in Ukraine's major fortifications and open the way to wider advances into central Ukraine, notably, as he said there, Dnipro and perhaps into eastern Zaporizhia. But we haven't to have any illusions here. The Russians are no more capable of quick maneuver warfare than the Ukrainians proved last year. In fact, probably less so. So they will continue grinding through this. The overall situation, in other words, there won't be a fast breakthrough and an immediate defeat, even if Pokrovsk does fall. But the wider situation needs to be considered here. Western officials consider this now the most perilous time of the war. One told me the other day that it was the Ukrainians in a worse position than they ever have been, and I could go on. Mm-hmm. We are at a critical, well, all junctions are critical, but this one is, we're in a really bad situation now, I think.
Yeah, and it's a lot different from where we appeared to be in early August when Ukraine attacked and partially occupied the Russian region of Kursk, in part probably with the aim of forcing Russian troops to refocus and reducing the pressure on Pokrovsk. Has, in your opinion, this strategy, has it failed?
Yes, it has. It was a gamble, as we said at the time. Was it worth taking? Well, hindsight now has told us probably not. The problem Ukrainians have is they're trying to hold on to what they have. They've lost about 1/3 of it so far. The Russians have committed airborne troops and may commit some Korean reinforcements. We'll see. I doubt it myself. But anyway, so the Ukrainians have found themselves fixed in Kursk, and having to defend land that, as you hinted in the report, might at one point be given away as a part of a land bank account, as it were. But I think they've lost more than they've gained, because those troops would be far better used in holding on in the south. And I think if you're sitting in a trench now in Selidove or Toretsk, or for that matter outside Pokrovsk, you might be thinking, you know what, we could do with those troops that are now fighting in Kursk, which are some of the best units in the Ukrainian army.
You know, in that report we just saw, we heard a soldier from Pokrovsk pleading, saying, give us shells, Europe. You know, military supply problems, they have been Ukraine's main concern since the beginning of this war. Has that still not improved, or has it not improved enough?
Well, look, provided, I think, about half the amount of shells to Ukraine, less than half, I think 1-something million, than North Korea alone has supplied to Russia. And that's why, as the report indicated, Ukraine is not only has an artillery shortage, but is greatly overwhelmed by Russian artillery, which, of course, as the young gunner said, kills most people still in this war, although it's challenged a lot by drones. So, no, Europe hasn't stepped up. Europe doesn't consider itself at war, and Ukraine finds itself facing some of the consequences of that now.
Military analyst Frank Ledwidge. As always, Frank, we appreciate your time and your valuable insights. Thank you.